I love Jonty, the time in between light football banter to saying, "Are you all bastards?"
Hey, welcome to Beer Christianity. My name's Jonty.
I'm Laura.
And I'm Malky.
Hey, we did that pretty good, right? Yeah. Hey, it's episode 71. And this one is going to be featuring Leroy Logan, Dr. Leroy Logan, who is a former superintendent of the Metropolitan Police. Bet you didn't think we were going to be interviewing a former cop on this show if you're a long-time listener. But we are, and we'll tell you a little bit more about him. But before we do that, what are you guys doing? You know, what's up? What's been happening in your lives? This is the part of the podcast that everybody hates, right? That I tuned in for Leroy Logan, and now I have to listen to
I don't think so. I think people like it when the people have bants.
Yeah.
Like, you know, when we're just like shooting the shit.
Yeah.
Like, sharing about stuff.
You're hanging. Well, the whole vibe of this was supposed to be you're hanging out at the pub with us. And like, you know, I have been drinking for quite some time before we started recording. So, you know, that's going to be good. What are you guys drinking, by the way?
I'm drinking water.
My goodness.
I know. Terrible.
Malky?
I'm drinking Brooklyn Special Effects alcohol-free lager, which is my favouriteest. Well, it's my favourite / favourite readily available one.
Okay.
I'll hold this up to the camera for the two
pretty.
people. It's got nice designs.
Yeah.
But it tastes dead good.
What's the vibe of the taste? Try and describe the taste to somebody who's never drunk it. This is going to be a real beer podcast.
Yeah.
It says on the label, thankfully, thank God, it's been really bailed me out with the label. Hoppy lager.
Oh, for fuck's sake, that is not a description.
What does
all
hoppy
beer has
taste
hops
like?
in it. Yeah.
Okay, but this is you know, unlike other lagers, this one is hoppy. So
Particularly hoppy. I don't like beer.
I think it's
what does
dark.
hop taste like?
Like the thing you don't like in beer, that's hops.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't think I'd like that.
Yeah, you're not a fan.
No,
I mean,
don't
it's
like
got
a beer that's too hoppy.
it's a dark glass, so I can't see the color of it properly. But I think it's dark.
Just pour some
Unlike
onto your
other.
desk.
Okay.
Pour some onto your breasts, like in Leaving Las Vegas with
Make it rain.
Nicholas Craig. Make it rain.
Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah, it's dark. Yeah. Well, now that I've done that.
No, that was beautiful, by the way. That's very sexy.
Yeah, we should start videoing these.
I am drinking Jack Daniel's Tennessee Honey, which is the Jack Daniel's for people who aren't hardcore enough to drink Jack Daniel's. So it's really sweet and it's got honey in it and it's really nice.
It is really delicious.
It's so nice. I think I actually bought this to take to Greenbelt, which incidentally is the festival at which this interview that we're going to play with Leroy Logan.
Look at that segue. Fantastic.
Was recorded. Greenbelt Festival is also currently running a really cool, we said this in the last one, but it's running a really cool pricing structure for the next festival where they're going to basically let you choose what level you support it at, which I just think is really cool. Yeah. So if you don't have a lot of money, don't pay a lot. But if you want to support them more, then you can pay loads. And I just think that's awesome. So, yeah. Speaking of the previous episode, can anyone remember what that was? Because that, I think, has a lot to do with this one. I know that you can remember it. We discussed this earlier. You know, we planned all of this.
Do not worry.
Scripted. You think it's chaotic.
Script.
Yeah, man. But who wants to tell the listeners why they should listen to the previous episode if they haven't?
Because it was Brian McLaren.
It was.
Malky, we scripted this.
That was an on-purpose joke, everyone.
Simon Hill was our last guest. He was the guy who was arrested for saying something that people didn't like around the time that the Queen died. And he also spoke quite a lot about the police and sentencing bill in the UK, which will make it much more difficult to protest or much easier to arrest and imprison people for protesting. So that's kind of why we went with Dr. Leroy Logan for this episode. And because it really follows on his experience with the police. Dr. Leroy Logan, as we said, was a former superintendent with the Metropolitan Police. He started in 1983. He retired in 2013. And he is one of the UK's most highly decorated and well-known black police officers. He started the Black Police Association, I believe. I think he was one of the founders of that. He's had decades of experience in it, and he has a book out, his autobiography called Closing Ranks, which is about his experience in the UK police force and in the Met. And Steve McQueen, the Oscar award-winning director of 12 Years a Slave, said of the book, "I was amazed and intrigued by the way Leroy had stood his ground and progressed within the Metropolitan Police against so many obstacles, hostility, outright racism, and being repeatedly overlooked for promotion." Steve McQueen went on to make one of his Small Axe films, which you can see on BBC iPlayer, Red, White and Blue, about Leroy Logan's life. So there's all that sort of stuff. He was, I think, the first black superintendent in the Met. And here's the interview we did. Thank you very much to Greenbelt for making it possible.
I guess my first question would be, you're part of a group that is often called a minority, that is not necessarily well represented in the higher echelons of the police, which is where you spent a lot of your career. How does it feel to be an Arsenal fan in the upper echelons?
I love that. I was wondering what group you were talking about. I thought you were going to mention my friend Lee John, who's the lead singer of Imagination. Because I always thought he set that group up 40 years ago. Yeah. And we went to school together. So, we used to run around together, similar as we do now. And they said, "Oh, are you part of Imagination?" So I thought you might go to bring...
my real question is, do you get bored with the question of, what's it like to be a black man in the police?
Yeah, well, it's true that I had that sort of question, being black in the organisation. And as, even more so since I wrote the autobiography, Closing Ranks. It's, I suppose if people are interested, they're, genuinely interested, and I want to know, I'll answer the question. I think in a lot of ways, a lot of things that I've done has been against the grain, I always say, if you want to reduce your Christmas card list by 95%, join the police. And so I lost a lot of friends, but then more acquaintances, because my close friends still stuck with me. Fortunately, I had a really strong family, my wife and my parents at that stage when I joined in 83. And also it was against two things. I had a career in science. I really thought that was my career path, and I was happy to live in that, or work in that environment, which I really appreciated. It was an international specialist unit in the Royal Free Hospital in Hampstead in London. So I was really enjoying that. And then calling and policing hit through various reasons, which you can read in the book. Mm-hmm. But the real challenge was, while I was in the application process, my father was badly beaten up by police, and you think to yourself, why would you still join the police? If you say you loved your father, why would you still join the police? What sort of love is that? But it's around knowing your purpose and realizing that, joining an organization, whether it's the police or anywhere else, can be your worst nightmare. And it was my worst nightmare in a lot of ways. But through that, it was my biggest breakthrough. My first line in the book is, your worst nightmare can be your biggest breakthrough. So I truly believe now I've gone through it, it has been more breakthroughs than I thought. And I thank God for that.
Breakthroughs, does it leave any scars, any trauma, or is it just, do they kind of erase that?
Do you know that I remember someone saying that women are traumatized by childbirth, but once they find the child, the pain's gone. That they're overjoyed. And I think the validation of certain things that I've said in the police service that has been shown evidence-wise, that seems to have eased the pain and the trauma that I went through, and other officers and other members of the public have gone through. as a result of policing, and the impact policing has. I know a lot of people used to say, there was a given that people trust the police until they had something to do with them. And I remember that survey that showed that. And I suppose there still was this given that people would automatically trust the police from certain cultural backgrounds. But that's changed, especially since Sarah Everard. And similar cases where the police were definitely at fault, not only in a police officer kidnapping, raping and killing Sarah Everard, but the fact that he came from a unit in the organisation which seemed to be a safe haven for sexual predators, and which it beggars belief that, one, he was allowed to join the Met from another force with that sort of history of sexual deviances, and then he found a place where he had his co-conspirators and alliances which allowed that culture of deviance to proliferate, and it beggars belief.
I think that's been the main criticism that I've really felt of the police over the last few years, particularly, is the bad apple argument doesn't seem to be being accepted anymore, because there's so much evidence of cultures of racism, of sexism, of homophobia, of just brutality from people even who aren't committing it, but who are allowing it, who know that it's happening. I mean, does that resonate with you? And what do you do about that?
Well, what that is clearly showing that it's a systemic issue, that a lot of the policies and practices, although it's well-meaning, are being adopted to show or present itself in a racist, sexist, homophobic, Islamophobic way. And no one seems to do anything about it. And that's where we call it institutional racism, institutional sexism, etc. So that there needs to be a real acknowledgement that there is something wrong and they're going to do something about it, and the action that goes with it. Too many times the police service fall into this default of we're learning or they're defending the indefensible. I mean, even up to yesterday, I did a tweet on Leroy Logan 999 that the Met made a statement around the Awami Davis missing person case. And they made a statement say that, retired black officers are making, outlandish statements, and it was totally out of context. And I said, well, is this their way of doubling down to be anti-racist? Because all it does is just reinforces people's perceptions of policing being very adversarial, not really in tune with what the public are saying about them and what they're experiencing with them. And, I really believe they're out of touch in so many ways. I'm not saying it was perfect in my time, because I've been retired 9 years now, but I just get a sense that they're more detached because they seem to have in their bunkers and they're just lobbing back fake news. Trust and confidence is great. Oh, we're clearing up crime. The streets are safer than before. Well, why are you now in special measures if that's the case? And in fact, you should have been in special measures 4 or 5 years ago. It wasn't for the different change in Her Majesty's Inspectorate that the new person, Andy Cook, has said, no, you're not fit for purpose. You've got to do something about it. So it just shows the culture is so toxic. It spills out on the public, and the public are saying, well, we knew this. And now we've got the evidence. And I think police need to understand that they just can't continue doing the same old things and expect different results.
How does a phrase like ACAB sit with you?
Explain ACAB.
ACAB. So, in a lot of people, particularly post George Floyd, all cops are bastards.
Oh, right. Okay.
I didn't want to say the words.
No. Just say it as it is. Don't hold back. Yeah, because there's so many acronyms that. Okay.
That's actually true.
Yeah. I really believe that that's not true. It goes back to what you were saying about, it's not just the bad apples in the barrel type thing. I still think there's less bad apples than the good apples. So what it means, though, that the good apples have to call out the bad apples, even though the barrel has got the systemic failures, and it allows the culture of fear to build so that the good cops don't call out the bad cops because they're fearful of the implications it can have on them as officers on a daily basis. So I know if the good officers allow that to happen and they don't speak out, then they will be seen as ACABs, So they need to speak out to show that is not the case, and they can change the culture from within and call out those rogue cops who make people's lives an absolute misery, who are on a control and power trip, and they need to be sacked or sanctioned in a way that then they change once and for all. And until we get the leadership to acknowledge that, we're never going to be accepting that the police are a service and not an occupying force. And I suppose that sort of social consciousness has increased. People are not going to put up with things or just accept things blindly. They're going to be more active. And especially with the younger generation, they're not just going to put up with it. And they're a lot more sophisticated now. They put their protests across. But I think there's definitely a need for people power and people to step up in a way and show that police officers, you're public servants, and serve the needs of the public, all of the public, and don't just see that you're there to just protect the haves from the have-nots.
Well, that was going to be my question, is that even in a situation where the police are not corrupt, the justice system seems to be, I always think of it like this: if I steal a computer from my workplace, the police will show up and arrest me. If my workplace fails to pay me, that's not the case. No one comes and arrests the CEO. Is there something like really fundamentally structural that needs to change in our legal system?
I don't think it's just the legal system, I think it's wider society. You get so much, especially this cost of living crisis. So many these big providers, the CEOs are getting massive bonuses, but that's just business. But people who are on the receiving end who can't pay their bills and have to make a decision between heating and eating, and and if they default, they could be put before the courts. It just shows that the construct has been there for many centuries. The Met Police was set up in 1829 to protect the haves from the have-nots, and that's almost been their raison d'etre, despite they're saying they're a police service over the last 20 or so years. But the key thing is that they have to walk the talk. But I don't see a critical mass of enlightened people to do that. When we set up the Black Police Association, we realised through our shared and common experience as Black people in London and different parts of the country that we could be the honest broker. We could be a force for change. We could really get the culture change. And we still got the BPAs all across the country, and national BPA are doing some great work, like the London BPA. But it is key that culture change is still so entrenched that the people who should do better and know better are not doing it, because it's the default position to say, well, listen, there's not a problem. We'll continue with that same old national agenda, nationalistic agenda, and so you don't want to accept other people and the different backgrounds. And especially after Brexit. Brexit was for me, it pushed back equality and diversity and inclusion decades, because hate crime went through the roof. You saw hardening of police tactics. It's more enforcement based. It was attracting the wrong sort of people into policing, that with their nationalist agenda, their control and power trips. It created a more toxic organization, and it's spilling out on so many different ways that you think we've gone back 20, 30 years. And in fact, the Met Police reminds me of a pre-McPherson era. McPherson was in the inquiry into the death of Stephen Lawrence, who was racially attacked in April 93, and that inquiry report in 99 talked about institutional racism, but you can see it in institutional sexism, and the change we saw there has unraveled in some respects. We still have Race Relations Amendment Act, family liaison officers, hate crime on statute books, all these things, but the culture seems to be raveling back to that pre-McPherson era, and no one seems to be getting a grips of that. I'm hoping the new commissioner, Mark Rowley, who starts in next month, will understand the time of change and will make significant changes once and for all. But the jury's out on that one.
I think with a lot of attitudes to the police, all of that is being recognized. And a lot of people are saying, defund the police. A lot of people are saying, instead of pouring so much into enforcement, we should be doing something to actually change the system that is, but then there are other people who are like, there is knife crime, there is gun crime, there are violent crimes out there. We need more police. And their biggest concern is there's not enough police on the beat. What would you say to those two kind of opposing factions almost?
Well, I know from the impact of George Floyd's killing and how it has heightened the awareness of the whole world, not just people in the justice system or the public involved in it. Police services right across the country, in the UK here, have seen things need to change. And obviously they've talked about defunding the police, which I don't agree with that term. I think there's a term that's already in circulation that highlights the needs to change how you deploy your assets through the public health approach, because I truly believe police shouldn't be called to every single mental health case. I think there should be a triage approach so that officers are not just turning up without the specialisms and not with their equivalent in the health service, who are able to assist that person and don't just take them to the prison cell where more than likely they are in so high stress and more than likely going to collapse and die, and which we've seen over years, because officers turn up at these things when they're not trained, they accelerate everything, they're not trauma-informed, not trauma-responsive, and they make things worse, actually. So we need to have a review of police powers, police training, how you apply your assets in a more structured and scientific way through the public health approach. And so certain police officers shouldn't be going to these type of calls where you have to see people more as patients than prisoners. There's too many cases where police officers turn up and see everyone as a potential suspect. And you just can't allow that to happen, because it just, you're part of the problem, not the solution. So I think the terminology of defunding can actually be reflected in the public health approach. And I've worked on an all-parliamentary commission on youth violence. And that commission talks about the public health approach and how you, again, get officers cognizant of people that they are serving and to be responsive to their needs and don't just see them as potential suspects. And, you have to be enforcement based. They just can't allow that enforcement default to be affecting everything that they deal with. And as I said, don't just turn up and accelerate everything, but de-escalate and get that sort of, objective way of dealing with the public.
De-escalation seems hard when you see stuff in the States where you have police departments with military-grade equipment. It's what you said earlier about an occupying force. And while the UK isn't quite getting there, the investment in more non-lethal and I think moving towards that direction seems to be happening. Why is that happening, and how do we stop that? Should we stop that?
Yeah, absolutely. We should stop it. And especially in the UK, we're still the envy of the world that we patrol without sidearms. We have more non-lethal options, but we know tasers are lethal at times. And we do have specialist officers with guns, transport hubs, diplomatic protection, royalty protection hubs, and we need to be understanding how we, when America sneezes, we catch a cold, and we could fall into that sort of default, even though gun culture in the UK is totally different to the US. I think the US has gone to such an extreme, but that's, their history of gun culture has been idolized. It's now constitutional, political thread. I wouldn't call it a golden thread, but it's definitely a thread of entitlement. And I don't know how they're going to extricate those guns from people. But I would like to think that we will not go down that road because culturally it's not there. But the issue for me is how America is influencing other countries. I see that in the Caribbean, their neighbors, and the American approach is really very, very concerning. And so it never deals with a problem because, you can't arrest your way out of the problem. You can't stop and search your way out of the problem. You can't shoot your way out of the problem because, violence begets violence. And that's why you've got so many multiple shootings. It's just not getting any sort of solution. It's great to be tough on crime, but you've got to be even tough on the causes of crime. What's leading to that? How do you get an understanding of not only the crimes committed, but how can you prevent it? How can you get those early interventions? How can you really be more proactive around that? Not just the firefighting type policing, reacting from one event to another, and not really getting a sense of knowing your community. And that I think is a key. If you know your community, if you're working with them, if you've got that relationship, when they set up the police service in 1829, one thing, even though it's a default construct, which it is flawed, but Sir Robert Peel said, the police are public and the public the police. There has to be that relationship. There's got to be that compact. There's got to be that mutual respect and support for each other, but not blind loyalty. That's what I'm talking about. But you need to have that sustainable relationship to address these issues, because the more you get the trust of the public, the more they will tell you what's happening, the more proactive you will be, the more efficient and effective you are. And when you reflect the public in your ranks and your grades are right across the organization, people will trust you. And that it develops that positive cycle of safer and stronger communities. But at the moment, we do tend to be falling into the enforcement mode, which causes me great concern.
And I think what you say there about it being across the grades is so important because, and this isn't just a police problem, but I think there's a thing of like, oh no, we've got diversity. Sure. In the lowest ranks, you've got diversity. Yeah. I mean, is that something you recognize?
Yeah. Recruitment, retention, progression has always been an issue. I say that police service has got a race problem, and it's not just around the disproportionalities in the public with stop and search and use of force and excessive custodial sentences, etc. But internally, in terms of the lack of progression, the lack of the fact that you're 4 to 5 times more likely to leave in the first 2 years than your white counterparts, you're 3 times more likely to be subject to a discipline action. You're never going to get a reflective organisation, and we in some force areas across the country, there's less black people in their ranks than there was 20 years ago before McPherson, and that's a real tragedy. And things have leveled off. We saw progress after the first 10 years of McPherson, but things have definitely tailed off, and it really needs the ethical leadership and the accountability and transparency to make this sustainable change. And it's the accountability and transparency piece is the one that the police push back on. That's why in my autobiography, Closing Ranks, I talk about how they shut out the transparency and accountability by closing ranks at the expense of truth and justice. And we need to turn that around and don't allow that sort of type of behavior to continue, because we're in a communication revolution and people aren't going to put up with that and think, well, have this blind sort of loyalty to police when it's not fit for purpose on so many fronts. I mean, as I said before, there's some great people in the organization. And in fact, I've said on record that there's nothing bad about policing that can't be changed by what's good in it. I think the goodness is there. It just needs the right leadership, accountability, transparency, the understanding of what policing is all about in the 21st century.
Final question. A lot of the question around policing currently for people who are kind of my people, kind of leftists and stuff, is around increased powers of the police when it comes to protests. And a lot of people calling for this in the kind of Tory leadership contest. I mean, also changing the laws about what's legal and not, which is not a policing issue, obviously. But how do you feel about that and policing at protests and democracy generally?
I think democracy is under attack by a lot of the Home Secretary's pronouncements of more draconian type of policing of peaceful protests. And I agree that there's certain protests that can disrupt the public in a way that has profound impact on national interest. But we need to address the issues why people see the need to protest in that way. Just again, as I've said, you can't arrest your way out of the problem. You can't stop and search your way out of the problem. You can't corral your way out of the problem. You've got to work with people, and it's the political will, because political will has a lot to do with how policing plays itself out. Look at Margaret Thatcher and how she used the police in a very enforcement way that they called us Maggie's boot boys during the miners' strike in the mid-80s. So we got to don't allow political expediency to play itself out in policing in a way that there is a political agenda. And unfortunately, you do get that now with this Tory government, which reflects a lot of Maggie Thatcher's values. And I don't know how you're going to do that other than at the ballot box to change this. But we're in worrying times, and it does concern me how this government believes that changing the Bill of Rights, changing the Human Rights Act, all of these things is going to make us safer and more secure. I think it's going to split division, communities, create more division, similar to what we see in the States. You know, the Constitution's been politically hijacked, and Roe v. Wade and the rights of a woman to choose, and it might not stop there. The issues on the LGBTQ communities, it's just you just don't know where it's going to stop.
It's terrifying.
It really is, and you know, if there's anything that really stirs me, you know, I don't want my grandchildren's generation to go through the same injustices and inequalities as their generation. I don't want their generation to go through the same injustices and inequalities as my children's generation, my parents' generation, because it does worry me that my grandchildren are going to be, if this political approach continues, it's going to be the worst case than 20 odd years ago. And, you know, that's the last thing you want for the next generation. We want improvements, and we can't allow the power trip of politicians and senior leaders in the justice system to have their way if it's not for the greater good of the public.
Absolutely. Dr. Logan, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
No.
Hey guys, what about Jonty's football banter?
Right?
Lovely stuff.
I'm impressed.
Hey, I mean, you're particularly impressed because that was very much your joke, Laura.
You know how we talk about it's all scripted.
That was actually scripted.
All actually scripted. Although shout out to George Luke as well for giving us a tip off that he is in fact an Arsenal fan, because I just knew there was a joke to be had there. I just needed that intel.
It is a beautiful thing. George's intel, then Laura's scripting of that initial joke. I just felt like
a well-oiled machine.
Absolutely. That's what people called me in prison. And they also I edited out then the subsequent football banter that I had with Leroy, which I don't know if you guys want to describe that football banter.
Oh, yeah. That's
That's
it. At least from Jonty's side. I'm assuming Leroy's football banter was actual football banter, but
he starts talking about how Arsenal played that weekend, and he pulled, you know, they turned around, whatever, and fair play. And Jonty's like, fucking, you know, tell me,
just immediately terrified he's going to ask me a question.
See that ludicrous display last night? It's just
ludicrous display.
And then followed quickly with another, like, just softball of, so tell me, are all cops bastards?
I did just have it's just so many acronyms. It's not wrong.
I mean, fair play to him for making me say the words out loud to his face.
Legendary.
I think that's, you know.
I think not a surprise that he hasn't heard it before, because as we have heard, not a bastard.
Not a bastard.
Not a bastard at all.
Not a bastard.
All cops are bastards? Not this one.
I feel like that needs to be we could institute that for all our guests, you know, after an interview. Bastard or not a bastard.
I mean, we could make the title
game
of this episode not a bastard. He handled it so well, though. So gracious, so nice. Just a really kind man when he was talking to me, and just really cool. I don't know, like, what did you think of what he had to say? Because while I was recording that, you were recording Brian McLaren, obviously, which will come up in a future episode. But what were your thoughts?
Well, hello. This is why we need to script the banter. Go on, Laura.
I was very delightfully surprised. I think you kind of hear, like, when you hear, I think of someone who's so high up in an institution as like a person of color in that situation, or a member of a minority, you kind of think like gay Tories kind of thing, and it's like, I think you can see like the good side of like we need to consider all the angles and stuff like that. But with I think one of the days when we were at Greenbelt, I just like looked Leroy up on Twitter, and it was when the Sarah Everard, the people who were arrested at the vigil for Sarah Everard, the charges were all dropped, and it was that day, and he was tweeting about like, that's absolutely right, like this was like a really terrible thing for the Met to do, and it was like, oh no, this guy's legit and he's cool. And I think it's really like brave to and impressive to have got like that high up and to be so openly critical of the institution that's given you those things, and to stand by those views. And I think that's a fantastic thing to say.
And I think also it's not so much that he's a minority in that institution and saying that, but that he's in that institution at all and critical of it, because that's and again, like we're probably a podcast that leans towards ACAB, right? And if not in actual every literal person sense, but like
we do have pro-BLM on our t-shirts, which is
we do, and quite like critical of the police as an institution. So to hear somebody who has been senior in that institution being super critical, not just of running that line of some bad apples, but actually saying there is some institutional stuff that needs to change here. I love hearing that.
I think going further than that and saying things are worse now than they were 20 years ago, when things were so bad that they led to the horrendous miscarriage of justice towards the Stephen Lawrence case, and saying like, oh no, like in some ways it's worse, which is I think really bolting to say, and like absolutely props to him for like opening up and saying it, because people need to be saying that.
And it's a good reminder, like with the talking points of the right, that you feel like terms like institutional racism is some like trendy woke term. But so it made me look up the McPherson report and what's up with that. So that was in 97 that came out, and I think, and that was the conclusions were institutional racism within the force. And I liked his, speaking of bad apples, I liked, what was it he said? There's good apples and there's bad apples in a barrel that's pretty bad. That absolutely he's, when I expected him to kind of do that, good guys on both sides sort of answer, then it was like, no, it's bad. Like, again, referencing the Sarah Everard thing when he was talking about, initially how the police are perceived, that they could be trusted, or a lot of people would think they can be trusted but have a bad rap in certain communities. And they said, but now, and I was thinking, improvements, no, it's even worse, because the white people as well are suffering. So
and the thing that stood out to me was that thing of like, everybody trusts the police until they have to engage with them, which I was just like, yikes, that is not a great reputation to have.
Yeah, I think as well as all of that, like I think I appreciated that he could see the good sides of it, because he was very much like, among all of this, like there are things that the police does that are good, and there is so much goodness there, and like I'm not saying like I would not want to lose the good there, and he was like, I'm not saying that he doesn't think that the police should be abolished, because like the good that's there is worth keeping. So like it's nice to see that it's not a bitter like complete disengagement from this institution. It's saying like, I really appreciate it, but also like you're so intensely flawed that there is things to be fixed.
And he didn't flinch at defund the police, quite happy to go, well, actually, we need to broaden it out and have a kind of, several pronged approach to like mental health crises, that, it's not just militarized police showing up to kick ass, but there's more sensible solutions.
It's not every kind of disturbance needs a cop to show up, because they are. But then this to me brings us back to the defund the police question, right? Because the people who say defund the police say, but a cop is somebody who is trained and orientated and deployed specifically to do those kinds of things. It is the state using violence to keep order. And as we've discussed previously on this show, on behalf of usually the wealthy. And the structure and the orientation and the whole way that we've kind of conceived of policing in our society is very much, and Leroy, I think, says this about protecting the haves from the have-nots, when Peel conceived the first kind of police in London. So yeah, I guess we love Leroy. Does defund the police just, a lot of activists are calling for that. And I guess as Christians, where do we stand on that? Because a lot of right wingers would go like, well, no, because the police are authorities. We're supposed to submit to authorities. As Christians who are not right wingers, where do we stand on the kind of the conception and deployment of police in society generally?
I think actually, having listened to Leroy's interview, I think my opinion has changed on the defund the policing, because I think he's convinced me to his way of thinking in like, it's not okay, maybe in some instances, like the extreme militarization of the American police force that we're seeing. I think, yes, we should not be funding that. Like, they should not have robot police dogs, because that's fucked. But I think I agree. I think there's a place for a police force that has the actual betterment and improvement of society and protection of actual human beings at heart, in a genuine sense, not in a way of serving of an authority. However, I think the funding of it has gone. Well, I think the defund the policing is more complicated than defund the police can, as a sentence, can cover it. I think it's not necessarily a defunding entirely. It's a reallocation of funds to the right areas. So it's not saying, well, just like get rid of all the police as funds. It's saying let's fund also like social services and like encourage training in like how like Leroy was saying, in like public sector like things, so that police will understand how to engage with the situation without escalating it, and like, treating addiction as an actual medical problem, not as a crime, and things like that. And it's a massive undertaking. It's a whole reformation that needs to. It's a massive undertaking, and there's no telling whether or not that's actually possible. But it gives me hope to know that there are people like Leroy who are trying. Yeah,
absolutely. I think for me, I was probably less convinced on that than anything else. I think I probably was stepped away from ACAB. I also know a very, very nice one of those community support guys who's just a sweetheart. But I think on the defund the police, I'm not sure that the way that it is currently conceived can be just. And maybe it needs to be defunded so that we can start again, and less reformation and more a kind of revolution or a step change or something like that in the way we conceive the people who we give the power of violence and restriction of liberty to, which are just, it's power over very fundamental freedoms that we consider to be human rights. I want them to be orientated in a democratic way around everybody. And I don't think that even if you get more mental health people, even if you get more public health people, even if you train them more in a whole bunch of stuff, the fact remains the entire justice system, this isn't just the fault of the police, but the entire justice system, the difference between criminal and civil crimes, I think means that any police force by definition is going to be acting on behalf of the privileged. I don't know. I still think that's problematic. Unless I ever get arrested, in which case I think they're doing an excellent job, obviously. And it's a really tough job, and they just need more resources.
So, Jonty, so he did respond when you were like, does the legal system need reforming? And he was like, another example of like expecting him maybe to go, well, let's just tread lightly. And it's just like, not just the legal system.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Yeah. What does that mean? I guess also to spark off what he was saying of the image of the kind of authoritarian, boot on the throat kind of approach.
Yeah.
Like, can that be rebranded? or doesn't need dismantled to have a force that looks like something like, how paramedics are there to help, rather than
like the fire service.
Yeah.
Like not only helpful and like net good, but also considered like almost universally hot. Which
I think more calendars.
I think so. Like, and just like maybe more like physical, like, recommend, like just you have to be built. Otherwise you don't get to be a cop. I think that may help.
Yeah.
I think that could be. Also, Leroy, if you're listening to this, I hope you're appreciating the really serious analysis we're giving to.
I mean, I do now that the more we speak about it, and I think I agree. I think with the kind of reformation and the revolutionizing of the law, in that I've been reading Nick Hayes's book of Trespass, who is another absolutely fantastic Greenbelt speaker who we did not get to speak to. But Nick, if you're listening, which you're definitely not, we would love to have you come on the podcast because you were great. But one of the points that he makes, his book is all about history of land rights and how in England currently it's really difficult to see any land because we only own, like, it's all 92% of it is owned by like private people and you're trespassing if you go on it. One of the points he makes is that a lot of the reason this happened was from the Norman invasion in 1066 kind of up until the 1800s really. The aristocracy could just enclose the land and take the land off peasants, and that was at that time like people's ways of life. They were moved out of villages, they were not able to hunt, they were not to find food, they could not like farm or gather food from the land, they were completely banned from using it, couldn't get firewood. It was a complete mistreatment of their way of life. And whenever peasants rose up against people and said no, we're not going to do this, and kind of tried to fight back, the law was almost exclusively changed to benefit the small minority of people who own the land and not just the common people. And if that's our history, if that's what's embedded into our culture and embedded into now what is shifted so much and that we don't even really remember where that land came from, like how much of the rest of our legal system is like that, and how much of it almost feels like we need to like really look into almost everything and just see, like, I mean, obviously maybe not everything. I feel like do not kill is still pretty up there as like a solid law, but
it sounded like you were just getting overwhelmed by the idea of the admin. Like,
I think some of the stuff.
Let's not be crazy about this. Like, do not. Yeah, no, come on, guys.
You'll
like,
probably
stealing,
copy and paste some of it and just put it in. Yeah,
but no, I think and it's just. But how do you do that? How can you do that? How do you reform that?
And without a revolution that is violent. I guess for me, it's also the question is about like what is specifically Christian about our approach to this, right? Because as a Christian, you believe in justice. You believe that racism is a blasphemy against the God in whose image we are all made, regardless of our race. You believe that the marginalized are the people who are probably most on God's heart. All these kinds of things that come straight out of Scripture and straight out of what Jesus and the apostles have kind of taught us. But then you also have the fact that the people who were enforcing the law in Jesus' time were the occupying soldiers, and he goes out of his way to help a few of them, like really makes a point of it, really makes a point of like healing one of their kids. He specifically tells his followers to be chill around them. I find that really hard to square with my own kind of ideology, except that's what Jesus always does, right? Do you think that you have the right to start, getting super self-righteous and thinking of yourself as better than other people, and then he subverts that and he points you in a different direction, I guess. But it's so easy for that to be like the end of the conversation and to go, so I guess then the police are fine because Jesus was cool with the centurion, and that's not the case.
I think,
right?
Yeah, because I think what to me, I see it as like reading the temperature of the room. Like the crowd would be like, yeah, Jesus, fuck those guys. Like, tell them, you get them, tell. And it's like, well, actually, like, you've got to love him as well. Like,
give him your coat.
Fuck's sake.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And it's interesting to circle back to like kind of what made a major part of Leroy's story is the fact that, back in the 80s, his dad was a victim of police brutality. And like he was, I read the story, I think he was a lorry driver at the time and was kind of approached by the police, and they told him his lorry was in the wrong place or blocking a highway or something like that, and he was trying to point it out to them, and he was beaten up by 2 police officers. And even after that, Leroy still went on to join the police force, despite the difficulties that caused in his own family and family relationships. And like that must have taken like a massive amount of forgiveness to be able to do that. That's an amazingly sacrificial thing to be able to do.
Yeah, I mean, that's some Jesus action right there.
Yeah,
forgive them for they know not what they like. And to, as you were saying, still have his strong views about what is broken, but also be in it. And I don't think a lot of people maintain that. It's either like attack it from the outside or get in there and then compromise to fuck and realize like you've just gone super beige and you can kind of maybe nudge the needle slightly, but you just spend most of your time being very diplomatic.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting though, because the early church did excommunicate people for joining the army. And I always wonder if we're always wanting to kind of tend to like, well, hey, there's no principles, there's no line too far to cross, I don't know. Like, do you think that's what, you meet one nice policeman like Leroy and you think, well, again, like, it's not like he's saying the police are fine. He's saying there's massive change that needs to happen. It's just an interesting place to find ourselves in terms of what we consider to be the Christian position, you know?
And it's one of those things as well people find very difficult with kind of the civil disobedience and the protesting against leadership and stuff like that. Yeah, I'm not saying this in that I have an answer, because I really don't think I do, and it's something that people struggle with because I still struggle with it, and just like it's a difficult line to walk, but I guess you've just got to just keep trying to live out those values in your own personal life and walk with Jesus, I guess. Like that's the only thing. It's the only advice I can give, which feels like very weedy, weak advice and very applicable to all situations. But but I just I mean.
But that's true. Like, unless you're going to start making, well, listen, this is where Jonty jumps in. Unless you're going to start making hard and fast rules for everybody.
Yeah, motherfucker.
No, you crossed the line. Out. No.
Straight to gulag.
Right to jail, right away.
Yeah, no, but like prison reform again is something that I think, we could talk about, because like prison is terrible for most people who go to it, right? Yeah. And it's a cornerstone of our policing system. It's a cornerstone of our justice system. And it is incredibly bad for society. It's incredibly bad for the people in it. The people in it are brutalized, usually turned into enslaved people. Yeah. It's
entrenched in institutional racism.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the people who do get stopped and searched, the people who do get arrested, the incarceration levels are all so skewed to people of color. Like,
and there's one thing of like being, I don't know, actually guilty of stuff, and in the criminal, whatever, the criminal people, being one of the criminal people
in the criminal club, crim club.
Yeah.
It's fair, it's one thing being a bad and then not being rehabilitated. That's fucked up. But then, like, if you're a good and you get like wrongfully arrested or the victim of prejudices and go into the prison system, that's just a downward spiral.
Yeah.
It's not like, oh, you're going to get loads of opportunities.
And the line isn't particularly clear between those two things, because there are people who are arrested for smoking weed That is not a thing that is damaging to the world. In fact, doing
bad. Oh no, that's
it's not a thing that is particularly bad for society. You know, I mean, I don't, but like, you know, fuck it. This is not causing harm. You know,
but again, Joe Biden does.
Indeed,
apparently, he's made an announcement.
Yeah,
saying a massive pothead. And we should all chill the fuck out, guys.
It's like we're all gonna go to Grateful Dead concerts, you know. 420
Kamala Harris has not said a word.
Kamala Harris is just breaking out all of her sets of handcuffs. It's really fun. Just
her robot dogs.
Sorry, listeners. So just before coming on air, then it was news that Biden's made a speech, and part of it is about on a path to decriminalization, that people who have been arrested for just possession.
He's really hoping to, you know, roll that news cycle back from where he was rolling back a whole bunch of the student loan forgiveness.
Yeah.
Or, you know, he wants to do some good. You know, who knows? Could be either. Could be either.
It's hard to know.
Hard to know.
He's only been the president for like a year,
really
like 2 years at this point. Like, just give him some time.
And just like, you know, Liz Truss has only been in the job, you know, for a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
You know?
And she's managed to tank the economy.
Can you blame
what have you done,
exactly,
Joe Biden?
Exactly. Biden, I think
Liz Truss has managed to kill the Queen and tank the economy.
Now we're going to test out how we really feel about police, because Laura's getting arrested.
That'll be fun.
That'd be great. This is all good. So, okay, as Christians, I think my main thing is just when I see Christians going like, no, we need to side with the police at all times, police right or wrong, we need to be giving them more resources and more space to do what they need to do, because the real problem with society is that the police don't have enough power. I'm going to say that's stupid. And we can all agree that that is stupid and wrong.
It's just baseline lack of critical thinking.
Yeah.
Like, it's not, I don't think it's a particularly Christian view to just assume something earthly is good. Like, you can't just be like, oh, because like they're protecting us because we're middle-class white people. Is often the case. Like, it's still of earth and it's still of humanity. Like, that doesn't make it, like, there is no way that can be inherently good. And I think if you're assuming of anything that is the case, then you need to start maybe not thinking that and just be a bit more critical about it.
Yeah, exactly. Because the thing that you need to be critical of is, are you just worshipping power? Is it just a kind of baseline response of like, well, mom and dad know what to do, you know, and just kind of giving in to any kind of authority or power? Or are you actually taking a critical view, like you say, Laura, and going, this power, on whose behalf is it exercised? And who has control over it? Who are they answerable to? How does it play out? That's the question I think we need to be asking as Christians, and going, who does Christ ask us to look after? And it is the vulnerable. The whole of that second half of Matthew 25 is talking about the vulnerable. The vast majority of the prophets in the Old Testament is talking about the vulnerable. If the power is being exercised for the powerful, for the wealthy, for the privileged, I don't think it's righteous. Almost certainly it's not righteous.
And when to make a bit of a sweeping statement, but you know, Jesus did it about the rich a couple of times, so
yeah, fair enough.
Precedent. You know, the rich don't give a shit about the law. Like Trump just constantly, even, you know, before the presidency, like just constantly gaming the system, lawyering up. Like, you know, there's no concern for keeping the law, and those underneath, somehow prop that up and assume that's a righteous thing.
Well,
and
like
if you think
cocaine
that's bullshit,
usage in the Houses of Parliament, for example, it's just like it's one rule for them and another rule for us.
Absolutely. Like, and if you think the idea of like the rich don't get punished and the law isn't for them is just empty rhetoric, ask yourself when last you heard of a rich person being executed in a country that has executions. Outside of China, obviously, has a different ideological standpoint on this. But in the States, do rich people get executed? They do not. They very rarely go to jail. And I think that's how you know that the system needs significant change, if you want to call it just. And if you're a Christian and you're defending it as it is, and you don't care if it's just, you may need to reassess your intersection of theology and ideology, I would say. Anyway, that's probably all we have time for this episode. So we are going to be coming up very soon to doing an episode or two with Brian McLaren, because you guys did interview with him at Greenbelt. I was going to say Greenpeace. An interview with him.
How much Jack Daniels have you had?
It's quite a lot, if I'm honest. So looking forward to that. If you have any comments on this episode, it'd be great if you got in touch with us, beerchristianity@yahoo.com, or you could find us on Twitter, or you could send us a SpeakPipe message, or any number of things. What question do you want to ask our listeners, Malky and Laura?
Who are you? And what's wrong with you?
Okay, so those are the two questions. If you could please get in touch with us as a Beer Christianity listener and say who you are and what's wrong with you in a couple of sentences, that'd be great. I think. And
if we get enough, we'll do a whole episode on it.
Yeah, I would love to do that.
That'll be great.
Anyway, thanks so much for listening to Beer Christianity. We'll be back with some more theology and stuff relatively soon. And maybe we'll do something about Halloween. I was really hoping to get this guy on Twitter who's an Orthodox Christian and also a heavy Marxist to talk about a spectre haunting Europe, because I thought it'd be cool for Halloween, but he hasn't responded to my message on TikTok, so very sad. But yeah, if you have any people who you'd like us to interview or talk to on the show, also let us know. And thank you very much for listening. I should probably tell them beerchristianity.libsyn.com. No, beerchristianity.co.uk.
Hell yeah.
That's where you can find us. That's what I'm talking about. We're on Instagram, we're on TikTok, we're on Facebook, we're kind of everywhere, So do tell people about us if you like it. And goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.